Welcome to Breakeven Part 1. In this video we are going to take some of the material that we have learnt about in cost classification and cost behavior, and we're going to use that knowledge of costs in order to understand the break-even dynamics of a business. So the important point about break-even is that it's the point at which a business makes no loss and no profit. In other words, the profit before tax is zero. In order to understand break-even, we need to know some terminology and we need to find out some information about a business. Specifically, we need to understand what the fixed expenses are in the business. We also need to know about something called the contribution margin. And as we go through this video, I will loosely refer to that as the gross profit in our context. And to go with this, understanding price and variable costs are equally as important. In the bottom left corner of the slide, I have put in there the break-even formula, which you can find in many places if you search for it. You will find that the fixed costs divided by the price minus the variable costs gets us a break-even point expressed in units, and the price minus the variable costs, if you do that calculation, typically what you are calculating is something called the contribution margin. We have covered the income statement. We've discussed the fixed and variable expenses, and on the right hand side of the slide we created what I called a kind of a simple income statement. Sometimes I refer to this as my income statement grid, and I'm going to use this income statement in doing some break-even calculations. Let's get into a really simple example in order to understand break-even. So here's a business that has a monthly fixed expense base of 60,000 Rand. We're assuming for now that it sells one product, and it sells this product for 20 Rand, and it costs 12 Rand to manufacture the product. So nothing complex here, just a few data points, and we're being asked to calculate the break-even in units and calculate the break-even in sales. So to do that, we're going to start off by saying, well, we need a break-even formula. And this would have been a formula I showed you earlier. I've changed the terminology a little bit. I've said sales price minus the cost of sales. And in this context, I'm assuming this cost of sales includes only variable costs. So you could rewrite this if you wanted to as gross profit over margin is the same thing as what I have written in here. So in other words, at the point of break even, the fixed costs and the gross profit are actually equal to each other. So let me show you how that shows up in the income statement. So let's start with our income statement grid, and let's put into this income statement grid some key information that was given to us about this business. We were told that the selling price is 20 Rand per unit. So I've put that next to sales. We were also told that the manufacturing cost, or the variable cost of producing these products, is 12 Rand per unit. So therefore we can assume that the profit margin for selling one unit is 8 Rand. That's pretty straightforward, and just notice that I've written that information on the left hand side of my grid. On the right hand side, I'm going to include another piece of information that was given to us as part of the data, and that is that the fixed expenses were 60,000. They're saying to us calculate the break-even volume and the break-even sales. So therefore I can put 0 in at the profit before tax, because that is what break-even is. It's making no profit or no loss. Now mathematically, we could work out what does the gross profit have to be in order for this income statement maths to work out. In other words, a 60,000 gross profit minus 60,000 in expenses will get us to a profit before tax of 0. So what you can see happens here at the point of break even, provided all these expenses are fixed, the gross profit and the expenses are equal to each other. That's why in our formula, instead of using fixed costs, I can just use gross profit. And instead of saying sales price minus cost of sales, which is this data here, I can just use the gross profit margin. So here's the gross profit in rands, here's the gross profit margin, and what I'm doing is I'm taking the 60,000 and the 8 and I'm dividing the one by the other, and what that gives us is a volume of 7,500 units that need to be manufactured in order to break even. Now once I've got the volume of sales, I can then say, well, if I sell 7,500 units at a selling price of 20 Rand, that's going to give me sales of 150,000. I've just multiplied those two variables together. I have to buy those 7,500 units from the supplier. So 7,500 times 12 Rand per unit will get me 90,000 Rands worth of cost of sales. And what we're left with is a simple income statement where 150,000 less 90,000 in variable costs leaves us with a gross profit of 60,000, less the expenses of 60,000 leaves us with a profit of 0, and we have described the business at the point of break even. Let's do a quick scenario here. Let's say it's our intention to make a profit in our business. So we don't want this profit here to be 0. What if we wanted to make a profit of 20,000? What if we set that as our target? How many more units would we have to sell? What would the volume have to become in order for us to make a profit of 20,000? So to do this, I'm going to use the grid. I'm going to put some data in here that was given to us. That hasn't changed. We're assuming that to make a profit target, which is my next piece of data, of 20,000, we are assuming that we don't have to hire more people or rent more space. So now if our profit is 20,000 and our expenses are 60,000, it means our gross profit must be 80,000. So we're adding on the way up, if you want, and we're subtracting on the way down. So 80 minus 60 will get you to 20. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take this gross profit, we're going to divide it by the margin, and it's going to give us our volume of sales. So of course now the volume has gone up because we are making a profit rather than breaking even. Once you have the volume, you can say volume times selling price gets you to sales of 200,000. And if your sales has gone up, you must buy more goods from your supplier. So 10,000 goods times the 12 Rand that the supplier charges us gets us 120,000 Rand in profit. Check your maths. 200,000 minus 120,000 equals 80,000. Minus 60,000 equals 20,000. And therefore what we have determined is that we have to produce an extra 2,500 more units in order to make this profit of 20,000 under these conditions. Okay. So here what I've done is I've taken the steps that I've been through in order to do the break even, and I've constructed a simple set of rules. So you would have noticed the process that I went through was, first of all, I used an income statement grid. I took some information that was given to me and I inserted it into the grid. If it's a break-even question, I made the profit 0. Once I'd made this 0, I could then say, well, I know what the gross profit is. It's equal to the fixed expenses. Then I could do my calculation here, gross profit divided by margin. That's where I used the little blue boxes and divided GP by margin. It gave us the volume. And once I had the volume, I could say volume times selling price, volume times cost price, in order to calculate these two pieces, the sales and the cost of sales. And then at the end, I check my maths to make sure that my income statement all worked out nice and neatly. So we will revisit these rules again when we do a practical example. And what you'll see coming up next here is a suggestion that you go and try out the exercise called Hips & Co. It's a break-even question. It consists of multiple different parts and different scenarios. There's some simple calculations in it, and there's some more complex calculations that require you to handle some tax implications in the business as well. And it helps us to create a budget for planning in the coming year. I will go through Hips & Co. in a separate video where we will use the rules and do all the calculations together. So that brings to an end our first piece on break even.